I'm Jeff Neal with CSAC, legislative representative for our government finance and administration area, and very pleased today to be working with all the fine people you see on the agenda. So I want to get started on the first item. We're here to talk about the CETF's resource guide for local officials, chock full of great practical things county and other local officials can do to promote and incentivize broadband in their areas. And to get us started, I want to introduce Trish Kelly and Gladys Papolitok. Trish Kelly's with Valley Vision here in the Sacramento area. She's a managing director there and has been working on these broadband issues for many years. I've appreciated a good working relationship with her for some time. Thank you, Trish. And Gladys has been with CETF also for quite a while now. She's an associate vice president at the California Emerging Technology Fund, where she and her colleague, of course, Sunny Wright McPeak, a past president of CSAC, have been just doing incredible work statewide, really helping people get connected and especially raising the importance of closing the digital divide in this state. We would not be where we are today if not for all their good work. Trish and Gladys, take it away.
Thank you so much, Jeff. And we just really appreciate the partnership with CSAC and the long-term partnership that we've had over many years on lots of different issues, but especially the opportunity to work with Jeff and his leadership over the past years, and really supporting the regions and the communities. And now we're seeing the fruits of a lot of that labor through the new transformative $6 billion that the governor has authorized in the legislature. And it's all still in process, and we'll talk about that a little bit today, but CSAC has had a major role in that advocacy for this huge catalytic investment to connect all of our communities across the state. Many of the counties that are represented are the most unconnected and underserved. And so that's been the mission that a lot of us through the Regional Broadband Consortia are working on. That's a statewide network of consortia that are funded by the California Public Utilities Commission through the California Advanced Services Fund. So we've been working for a long time. There's some incredible opportunities, but the thing is, if we're talking about infrastructure investment, we want to make sure that at the local and regional level, we're ready to be able to plan for and receive that investment. And that includes working not only with our providers, but our infrastructure builders, doing joint use projects with transportation. So this California Emerging Technology Fund, Jeff mentioned the leadership of Sunny and Gladys, long-term partners in many different ways to try to help bridge the digital divide. They are supporting us to prepare this resource guide, which is really a toolkit and a roadmap. Very practical examples of communities, including many counties across the state, but also local jurisdictions and regional organizations that offer us lots of resources. So I'll go through the guide and give you an overview just of what's in it today. And then we're going to hear from some of our leading counties on the things that they're doing on the ground. We want to be a resource for you, and we want to provide resources for you so that we really can take advantage of this historic opportunity. So I'm going to turn it over to Gladys, my partner in crime.
You are a great partner in crime, Trish, so thank you. And thanks, Jeff, for the introduction. Sunny likes to say nothing happens in the state unless supervisors get behind it. She's a great advocate for the work at the county level, and so we know how important it is in order for any of this to succeed that counties are prepped and ready to do this work with their regional and state and local governments. So that's really what the resource guide is about. This is an update of the resource guide that happened over 10 years ago, originally with the Orange County Business Council. And now Valley Vision and Trish and her team have taken up the the mantle and done the updates. A lot has happened in that time period. Pre-COVID, people were understanding the digital divide, but post-COVID, it really has just highlighted how deep the digital divide is for the state. That is the mission of CETF, as you may all know. And so we want to make sure that counties and your partners and stakeholders are resourced with information to help get you on the planning side. A lot of that has happened with the regional consortia, one of which Valley Vision is around the state. And so, connecting with those regional consortia, we think is also another critical step in that. I think two of our speakers today, Steve Monahan and Colt Prisabella, can attest to that. They are very in tune and have worked with their regional consortia to over the years in order to get broadband planning and projects off the ground in their regions. So really that's what the resource guide is all about. And you'll see examples there from throughout the state, as well as some national examples. And there, as Trish mentioned already, the $6 billion from the state will be matching federal dollars that are, more billions coming in very soon. And so we're at the tip of the iceberg in terms of, funding for the first time, not for the first time, but significant funding resources in a long time to really make a huge dent in the digital divide in terms of infrastructure and hopefully adoption of broadband too. So for digital equity throughout the state and nationally. So thank you for including us in this, Jeff. I would be remiss to mention if I didn't mention that Jeff has also been a longtime expert advisor for CETF. And so he has been, active in this work with us since the very beginning. And so we really appreciate that, Jeff. And thanks again for including us in this.
I can start now with going over what is in the resource guide, and with a mind to the fact that we hope that all of you listening can be thinking about what's going on in your own communities. We have a little checklist at the end too that kind of has us think about, are we ready? We're in the Sacramento region, Valley Vision, and we have a lot of different counties and jurisdictions. We run the gamut from urban, rural to suburban, and different people are in different places around where we are. So if we could go to the next slide, please, I could just give you a quick overview about Valley Vision's role in digital inclusion. So we basically serve the 6-county Sacramento region, which is an overlay with our Sacramento Area Council of Governments. So we work very closely with our COG, and it's a metropolitan planning organization, and they're working on metropolitan planning to direct investments of $35 billion over the next 20 years. And they really came to the regional leaders a couple of years ago and said, where are we going in terms of our economic goals? And we want to align those transportation investments with that. And how do we deal with our overall regional economic strategy? And when we did that, that's some planning over the last couple of years. The broadband infrastructure and access and adoption pieces really came up both for infrastructure and also workforce skills. And so we have a very strong alignment with our Council of Governments on that aspect. Valley Vision manages, as I mentioned, the Connected Capital Area Broadband Consortium. That actually is for Sacramento, Sutter, Yolo, and Yuba counties, because Placer and El Dorado County are in another neighboring consortium managed by the Sierra Business Council. And we work with all of the surrounding consortia, and we support each other. And, as a infrastructure, it's often regional that crosses county lines. So really important that we are also working together with providers and trying to accelerate the adoption of this infrastructure more broadly. So through the managing the consortium, and other consortia have these capabilities. Also, we do a lot of mapping. Our broadband leader, David Espinoza, is an engineer, so he does a lot of the technical work, mapping, speed testing, validating where where service is actually meeting reported standards. We work very proactively with providers to try to get them to commit to doing projects in our unserved or underserved areas, preparing applications to the PUC and other funding sources, working with local governments on policies and resources, and just trying to be a capacity resource. So encourage everybody in your areas to be connecting with your consortium. We also manage the Sacramento Coalition for Digital Inclusion with a partnership of the library, the city of Sacramento, our universities and colleges and community-based partners. And now this is an effort that's funded by our workforce boards, because we realize that you can have the connectivity, but you also know how to use the internet. You have to have affordable access. You have to have access to devices. So we're trying to take a holistic approach in our region. And we hope that some of the state and federal money that's coming will allow us to address all aspects of the digital divide. So we have integrated broadband into our economic prosperity strategy, which is also our comprehensive economic development strategy certified by the federal government, the Economic Development Administration. I mentioned that because EDA is taking a much bigger footprint in providing funding for planning and infrastructure projects. And we'll talk about a couple of examples of how that agency is emerging as a major funder and good to position for the rural counties. Then we also coordinate with our workforce boards and community colleges. So we have a lot of system overlay, and the broadband piece keeps coming up, especially for an enabling technology for some of our industry sectors, but that the need to develop digital skills for a competitive workforce. And then we do play a state leadership role. We work with California Forward and other groups, statewide network of partners, and really happy again to just talk about the collaboration with CSAC on the major state initiatives. It really lifts the voice when we have a partner with our elected leaders. So next slide, please. These are a couple of our reports that are resources for everybody. Today we'll talk about the guide, but we also have a digital inclusion action plan. And then we have a preferred scenarios report that is really identifying not only the areas of gap, but where the infrastructure assets are in the region. And that's through anchor institutions and scenic, and the working with SACOG and Caltrans on our strategic transportation corridors. So many regions have these preferred scenarios reports. This information, we hope, is being used by the PUC as they're mapping the middle mile routes that we need to address to get to the last mile, building off this existing data. Next slide, please. And here's the guide. So we'll go into the guide now. Next slide, please. So basically the guide starts with laying out the roles of local and regional government in the broadband realm. And they cover many different kinds of functions, from policy leader and planner. There are several planners and economic development staff, or CIOs, on the call today. You also regulate through implementing ordinances and policies, and then you're a consumer and a user of technology. And there's a thought that you can drive partnerships with providers and others by being a purchaser, and you control and manage infrastructure assets as well, and you're a service provider. So one of the things we really want to look at is how you can leverage your own assets and know what they are. And Gladys, if you want to mention here an updated resource checklist that CETF has just developed for communities.
Yes, thanks, Trish. Yes, we have a quick 2-pager that I'll share in the chat with folks, just to help kind of, do a quick checklist and actually a scorecard of sorts that can be used by counties and cities. So I'll share that in the checklist, and you can contact us for more information. So
Great.
I don't want to interrupt Trish too long.
Great, Gladys, thank you. Okay, next slide, please. So just using the resource guide, there's a lot of different materials. There are links to actual plans. There's links to policies and ordinances. There's links to sample resolutions. There's a lot of case studies. Well, we're going to hear from Steve today from Nevada County. There's constantly new movement coming along. Supervisor Bradford's going to talk about a new broadband plan for Yuba County. So we're trying to update the information as well. But just to note, as you know, and you've heard, this landscape is rapidly changing. Not only are there new technologies and providers, but now just tons of new federal, state, and local funding sources and policies. So we're all trying to keep track of this and work together. And again, see your consortia as a resource for that. Next slide, please. So the methodology was that we did a lot of data gathering from state and national organizations, and a lot of those are best practices, and we work with federal government agencies on a regular basis. So we kind of track and try to learn from each other. We also do a lot of outreach on an ongoing basis with local governments and ISPs to kind of understand from their perspective what would help them invest. And honestly, one of the biggest things is having good policies and ordinances at the local level. So we've worked with a lot of consultants that are preparing plans, and then, you know, this statewide network. So there's a lot of different data sources in here, and it's intended to be a living document. Next slide, please. So one of the first areas that we start with is it's your overview approach. It's a broadband master plan. So many communities have done a strategy or a master plan where it pulls everything together. So you look at the current policies and priorities, but you also, this is where you can do an in-depth assessment of what you already have and what the gaps are, and an asset inventory, which is really critical, because these are things that you can leverage or monetize, or you can figure out what you don't have that you need to do. If you're in a more urban area and you're trying to deploy 5G, especially the signals don't travel very far, so you need lots of points where equipment can be placed. And so knowing what all of these assets are, and then aligning them also with state rights of way and federal rights of way, can give us more opportunities, because they help accelerate, again, the broadband infrastructure by making those assets available. And then it's looking at your regulations for leasing and permitting and things like that. And they include funding strategies. So they can be in a general plan or exist as a separate document or a strategy. Oftentimes these plans are conducted by economic development, and you'll hear a few examples today. Next slide, please. So these are a few examples of counties that have done master broadband plans. And I'm going to give you a little recap on El Dorado County. We've had them talk in some of our prior presentations, but they started their process in 2015 and really got a planning grant from EDA and have worked over the years to really do a lot of different kind of analyses. They have an ad hoc committee that they work with community and government partners. And so they've really got a great plan. And they identified a middle mile fiber project for 3 community areas, which are really to connect on the business side. So that is why their application to the Economic Development Administration is more relevant, because EDA funds for business and economic development rather than the household side. And then Humboldt County has been a long-term leader also in the process of an overall plan. Next slide, please. So El Dorado County did a broadband case study for us, and I have more detailed information if you would like to see what they did, but next slide, please. They started with a recap from 2015. They went year by year on all of the steps that they took, and they worked with other regional consortia to kind of figure out the planning process, but it was really the foundation of the feasibility study and then the financing studies that set them up to apply to EDA then for an implementation grant. Next slide, please. And they had to deal with some issues regarding design and engineering, but they did get a conditional grant of close to $4 million. So it gives you an idea of the scale of funding that could be available in addition to all the other federal resources. If we have the planning and can make the case. Next slide, please. So Dig Once, Dig Smart policies are really important and valuable because they help reduce a lot of redundancy and cost, and they help get fiber into the ground when there's open trenching or other construction projects. And this can be with the transportation project, but it can also be with other kinds of projects. If you think of other public works or working with other districts, utilities, or other municipal districts. And there are some groups that are also collaborating with councils of government in Southern California, where they are looking at new approaches on things like micro trenching, where you don't have to dig as deep a trench. So it not only is it less costly, but you can get the projects done more quickly. So providers are looking for opportunities to partner also with local governments, and just a lot of benefits. Policy is going more at the state and federal level for this. So it's really optimizing your infrastructure processes. And a lot of the master plans have dig once, dig smart policies embedded in them, but you can also do them, as a corollary. Next slide, please. And so these are Calaveras and Tuolumne counties have permits and conditions for things like the trench cutting in streets. So anytime you're going to be thinking about doing a build project, looking at what your policies are can really be valuable. Next slide, please. So this is another one that I think is going to be more and more looked at as an opportunity, because you have much more money now flowing to local governments through the recovery funding and the state funding, where every county is going to get funding for broadband. So, the projects can be pretty costly and be used up pretty quickly, but some of the funding could be used to leverage investments or partner with providers to do what's called fiber to the premises, or doing fiber networks or fiber rings. And there are examples of those. And these are really good public-private partnership opportunities to develop networks that the jurisdictions can invest in, but they don't have to operate, but they get better access themselves, and they can really ensure connectivity. Next slide, please. So another important tool is a master license agreement, where the jurisdiction has an agreement with a provider or a builder. And that's around how you would make conditions on use of the assets, the infrastructure assets like poles, towers, antennas, buildings, etc. And so that kind of sets forth what the use of those facilities would be. And that's, again, important for the small wireless facilities are the things that you use for point-to-point for 5G, for instance. Next slide, please. So there's a lot of additional models and case studies that are included in the report, and they go a little bit deeper into examples. And we'll hear today about Central Sierra and the EIR in Nevada County. And just want to note that you can be partnering with your councils of government, like South Bay has a fiber network that's got different funding sources. It's had workforce board, it's had transportation funding, and they link with work with Caltrans, for instance. And then some of these also include digital equity plans. So they're explicit policies to make sure that the community access and equity piece is included. And then there are regional groups like Joint Venture Silicon Valley that work with a big network of partners to address specific issues. One of their things in joint venture is there are huge wireless gaps there, because there are a lot of line of sight issues down in the peninsula. Next slide, please. So we also include additional resources in the back. There's a feedback from providers from a roundtable we did last October that gives some insights. There's a digital equity bill of rights that many of us have signed on to that was prepared by CETF, and it's certainly something that you could consider adopting in your community. All the counties in the last decade did adopt resolutions for getting connected, but this is kind of the next level. We also have sample resolutions and sample model policies that local governments are using. The Southern California Council of Government Association of Governments and SANDAG has adopted resolutions at the the board level, and then prepared a lot of resources for local communities to adopt. And one of the things that they're doing is they're doing a lot of research then to identify where their target unserved areas are and how to ensure that transportation investments bring equity for mobility and access to communities. They're also, though, working with providers on prototyping things like maybe a common ordinance across all jurisdictions, or pilots around, for instance, micro-trenching. So there's a lot of examples there. And then we just have links to state and federal agencies, nonprofits, foundations, and other leadership groups so that you can link on. We find, for instance, that the National Telecommunications and Information Administration has fantastic resources. They're a coordinating body now across the federal agencies. They have great webinars. They have resources for local communities. They now have funding that they're pushing out. So there's some really good resources there. And that's the link to the guide. Next slide, please. So the question for all of us to consider here is, as you're trying to get ready, do you have a strategic broadband plan? Have you looked at your policies and ordinances that are really going to help promote and accelerate investment? Have you inventoried all of your assets that you could use for deployment? Are you coordinating with Caltrans and your councils of government on local transportation and infrastructure projects? And I will add now that the State Public Utilities Commission is planning with Caltrans and the Department of Technology on the building for the middle mile open access network to get to the last mile network. They're looking at 8,000 miles of fiber across the state, leveraging state highway rights of ways. So there's going to be a lot more activity coming. I know that you had a webinar last week with the PUC and other state agencies. So there's a lot of input happening, but really need to be proactive as these planning projects come through, because the money has to be deployed over the next few years. And so the question at the local level then is, are you planning to use some of your own direct economic recovery funding for broadband projects? So again, the guide can help you make sure that you've got the policies in place, because that's the providers, say that's the way that the more investment ready the community is, the more likely they are to want to partner and invest. Next slide, please. So what's on the horizon? There's a lot today. Even there's legislation moving through. The governor's funding, the budget bill there was a trailer bill, SB 156, which has treatment of the $6 billion that's going to go into the state funding for building out this network. And then there are two companion bills, SB 4 and AB 14, that is for the California Advanced Services Fund, that provides funding for infrastructure for households and also for the Broadband Consortia. So we're waiting to see how all of this works through. The PUC is having input sessions for this deployment of the middle mile open access network and reaching these last unserved areas. And so there's a lot of rulemaking that's going to happen over the next couple of months. It's really important that everybody's voice is heard, because there are some efforts to, take some different approaches to how this funding would be deployed. For instance, not having the state build the statewide network, but having at least leasing from private providers, and there's, cost and other challenges to that. So overall, framing this is the implementation of the Cal Broadband for All Action Plan, which was passed through an executive order by the governor last year. And that directs the agency through the Broadband Council and others to really help implement the plan. So a lot of this $6 billion is in coordination with that. So also a lot of us, including your leadership here and Jeff, are tracking the new federal recovery programs. And the infrastructure bill, it looks like it will pass the Senate in federal land in September. So that's going to bring not only infrastructure money, but a lot of money for digital inclusion and adoption. So lots to watch for. And then just at the local level, working with your local governments to identify the broadband priorities that are ready to go, and working with your ISPs to increase to get them interested in investing in the opportunities you've identified. So I'm thinking having more money will help bring more people to the table. And I am very happy to introduce now Steve Monahan, who's the Chief Information Officer and Agency Director for Nevada County. And Steve has been a real leader, and I'm really thrilled to hear more about what Steve is doing. And he's a neighbor, so looking for partnership opportunities as well. So Steve, happy to have you join us and give us an overview, please.
Thank you very much, Trish. I appreciate that. All right. Hello, everybody. I'm Steve Monahan, the CIO for the County of Nevada. For those of you who have visited Nevada County, you know how wonderful and beautiful our area is. With that beauty comes very challenging topology. To build broadband in, we have tall mountains, deep canyons, rivers, creeks, hills, and depressions, and the list goes on. Our county spans almost 1,000 square miles from east on the state of Nevada state border to over the summit, continuing west to almost the North Valley floor next to Yuba County. The majority of our residents live in very rural homes on larger spread out lots located in the wildland urban interface. There are very few dense neighborhood opportunities for broadband providers to build out. In addition to those challenges and the topology, we have 200-foot tall trees that stymie wireless providers, and we have lots and lots of hard rock granite that challenges or outright prevents underground construction. Aerial construction is subject to wildfire outages, as 85% of our homes are located in the 2 highest wildfire danger tiers per CAL FIRE. We just experienced this recently with our river fire event, and a brand new fiber to the home project went down for almost 2 weeks. Thus, as you can see from all of that, our local broadband is in dire need of upgrades and expansion. And for that to happen, the county has to play an active role in it in a variety of ways. So today I'm going to go over and look at 5 county broadband enablers that we're focusing on. I mean, there's more things, but I think these are the main key ones. I believe any county can take action on these 5 enablers as well. You all can do this. I'm not going to have a lot of time to go through each one in a lot of depth. So my last slide, I only have 2 slides. So my last slide is kind of a contact slide. So screenshot it or write it down, and please feel free to reach out afterwards. So looking at our enablers. First one, and this seems really obvious, right? Officially make broadband a top Board of Supervisors priority. But how do you really make it that way? For us, I know every county does this a little differently. Our board does an annual kind of strategic planning workshop, and they identify 9 to 10 main objectives. These are the main priorities for the county. So out of all the things counties do, they're picking 9 and saying, okay, county organization, we want you to focus on these. And then they group those in A, B, and C priority. So broadband has been kind of bundled in with economic development for years. But starting 2 years ago in 2020, the board broke that out and created a A-level standalone broadband expansion and development priority. And what that really does for us staff is that gives us the marching orders. We have to deliver on this board priority. It also gives us the ability to start looking at our internal budgets and staffing and apply resources to this board priority. The third thing it does is we use a performance management platform where we track progress against board priorities. So once a quarter, we have to report and put up what we've been doing for the last quarter into the system. That generates a nice big report that goes to the board and then goes on our website for the public. So we're constantly being held accountable to what are you doing against this. Next one, establish a county broadband team. So I would say, personally, for me as the CIO, this has been the single most important aspect to lift up our initiative and really get momentum going. We've done more in the last 2 years than we did in the previous 10 combined. And it's because we've got a team now. It's not just the CIO or the economic development director trying to push broadband, you know, because no county has a broadband department, right? It's other duties as assigned. And broadband, you know, a CIO is a big job. Broadband is just a little piece of the pie there. So now our CEO, because we have this top level board objective, created a broadband team. And we have people from the CEO's office, we have board analysts, we have the planning director, we have the community development director, and we also partner with Sierra Business Council for economic development services, and they run our regional consortium as well. And now they're a part of that team. And as a team, we're meeting monthly and we're moving projects forward. An example would be, we've been talking about a dig once policy for 10 plus years. Last year, we implemented it. It's because the Public Works Director is on our broadband team. It's a board policy. There's the marching orders, get stuff done. Next, develop a broadband strategy and plan. Again, we work closely with Sierra Business Council that leads our Gold Country Broadband Consortium. In 2019, we worked with them to develop a strategic plan, and that was a CETF funded activity because CETF funds the Gold Country Consortium to SBCs. So we didn't have to pay for that. We worked with them. Right now, we're updating that plan, and we're going to add a new broadband policy specifically to even reinforce the importance of that. Next item, be a catalyst. So our county doesn't particularly want to become a broadband provider. We've never wanted to do that. We don't provide utility services. We don't have the infrastructure, organizational infrastructure to do that, nor the physical infrastructure to do that. But we have to promote broadband expansion. So how can we do that? And there's a lot of different ways county can do that. And Trish talked about a lot of that, and it's in that pamphlet. You know, advocacy, legislative advocacy, working closely with the ISPs, helping do grant writing assistance. So we contract with SBC again for economic development services and now broadband services. So they're helping some of our local ISPs apply for grants, like to the CPUC, the CASF grants, and helping them be more competitive on that. You know, being active in CSAC, RCRC, working with the CETF. We work with Sunny and Gladys a lot. We're working with our CPUC counterparts. So there's a lot to do. And then the last one is something I think is unique to Nevada County in California. Is 2 years ago, we created a last mile grant program, because how do we get local providers? We have a middle mile in our county, and for 12, it was funded through ARA. And for 10 plus years that it's been active, we don't have a single last mile provider who's tapped into that. So we were like, what do we have to do to get last mile providers to start doing projects? So we started this locally general funded grant program, and it's been really amazing, exciting, and successful. And I've got the dollars up there, but you know, it's pretty modest. But what we're talking about is seeding pilot projects, demonstration projects, and then we're working with those providers to go after bigger money, because now they're an established entity, they've got a proven project, and they're applying for the CASF money, and they're going to start applying for these other monies that are coming available. So, and it's just really exciting. We used $1 million of CARES money on broadband, and we've identified about $2.5 million of the ARPA money to go to infrastructure. And I'm hoping a lot of that'll be with broadband. That's to be determined. And then last, I'll talk a little bit about is making your county attractive to providers. And our broadband team's goal is to make Nevada County the best, easiest, and most attractive county in California for providers to invest in and build out their infrastructure in. Because not all counties and communities are created equal. And if you talk to the providers, they're like, we don't want to go there. That's just the hassle factor is too high. Or we do want to go over here because those people are great to work with. We want to be those people who are great to work with. Other ways, we've been looking at our permitting and processing. That's why we have our community development agency director on our broadband team. They have marching orders to make the entitlement, the environmental review process as painless and as quick as possible for broadband providers. That's their marching orders. And we've gotten great feedback on that from the providers who have done projects now. And then the project that's on the board here is we're working really closely with CETF, Sonny McPeak, on a programmatic EIR and a provider toolkit. And CETF was generous enough to give us a grant to help with that. We're using some other county money because it's a big project. And really, that's about how do you make projects shovel ready? And looking at the grant programs, but also looking at private investment. Private investors want to see shovel-ready projects when they're doing their due diligence and evaluations of where they're going to place their money and what projects they're going to fund and give that money into a provider to do the projects, because the providers don't have the money themselves. They're going to an investment firm or a venture firm. Having the environmental work ready to go, having a local government who is a partner with the provider scores major points for them. And we've even done multiple meetings with investment firms to tell them we're here to support this project and this provider. This project is really, we've been working on it for since about January. We've had great pro bono assistance from Crown Castle and Nosselman that CETF has lined up for us. And we're hoping this can become a real model, statewide model for other counties to look at. And I'm just about out of time. But the last point, I guess, is our goal is we want providers that are looking to all of your counties and say, you know what, we'll get to you after we're done with Nevada County. So I'm kind of giving away the secrets here, but that's our strategy. We want to be the best go-to county for providers. So with that, I will stop sharing and my time's over.
Well, it's a lot to pack in a lot and in a short amount of space. And thank you, Steve. I learned a lot and I'm really eager to see the materials but it's your leadership and, you know, all the work as we can see, and you'll hear in the other case studies, this is kind of a long game. You've been building the foundation for a long time and you're showing that leadership. And I love what you said about, you know, having a team and having a plan, and you're really executing on all those things that you've built and you're innovating. So we're really grateful, and I hope we have more opportunity again to go deeper, you know, and learn more. So thank you, Steve, for all your leadership and great ideas. Okay, next I'd like to introduce Cole Prisbilla from the Central Sierra. Cole is working on multi-county approaches and really very dynamic and just really inspires me every day with his energy. So Cole, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, I'm going to apologize up front because I think the energy is going to be a little frantic today. I actually was going to present, but I have no power because there's a fire in the city of Jamestown and it looks like it's coming towards Sonora. So we're considering packing up. But I want to talk about broadband because it's so important and I'm excited about it. Essentially, we're at the Central Sierra. So we're talking about Amador, Alpine, Calaveras, Tuolumne, Mariposa. And if you were to see slides, we would talk about the fact that connectivity as of 2018, really only about 19% of that 5-county region actually has access to anything above 100 megabytes per second. The vast majority is 25 megabytes per second down and 3 up. And we have about 12% of our residents that truly zero, and that's not even the underserved definition of 6 down, it's 12% of our region. So essentially that accounts for about, according to the 98% served, that's about almost 10,000 residents that don't have access to broadband. And so we went down this path of trying to figure out what it is we needed to do. And one of the things that I really wanted to highlight was we did a broadband conference, but what we really didn't want was a group of people to come talk about broadband and then leave. We wanted people to really have actionable items. So if I had anything to suggest, I would have a suggestion of education. And really what I found is that is really what's the most powerful tool, especially when it comes to supervisors at the county level. Boards of supervisors and those that come into this, the county politics really want to provide broadband, but they don't understand necessarily what is a WISP, what is fiber line, what's the difference of a conduit. And so really having a really purposeful pre-conference meeting with 2 supervisors from each county, and I included RCRC, California Emerging Tech Fund, the USDA, Rural Development, and the Department of Technology in that meeting. So we really had knowledgeable people that could share with supervisors what it is we're talking about. And then at that main conference, have the feds there, have the state there, have the tribal nations there, have your internet service providers there. Because one of the things that I really found is the main internet service providers that we all know, they definitely have the resources and the knowledge of how to utilize the California Advanced Services Fund or RDOF. But some of our smaller, more private internet service providers have never actually met Advanced Services Fund senior engineer. And so we had Jessica Honeyfield come to the meeting and talk to those internet service providers about pre-applications, about applications, and that was instrumental. And then there's a slide on, I'd love to share this PowerPoint with you guys about education. There's some really nice slides. We put together like, what speed do you need? Because that was one of the other questions is, how do you explain what kind of speed you need in a millennial household versus a remote working household, and kind of correlated those bandwidth. And then I have lots of resources about maps, but what we're doing now is out of that conference, out of a lot of conversations, was that we needed a broadband roadmap. And that roadmap is going to be asset correlation. So where are all those resources we have around? Can we collateralize the preferred scenario that we did with CENIC and California Emerging Tech Fund? What are the top 5 priorities? And then now, especially if we're going to have a middle mile, where are the last mile priorities? We're going to do policy recommendations. Steve was just talking about Dig Once policies. We put in a trench policy, but what are the policies across the 5 counties? So very similar to what Steve just said. How do we be attractive for internet service providers? I want an internet service provider to say, hey, I want to put a fiber line from Alpine all the way down to Mariposa, and they don't have to change permits or policies across county lines. And really also collateralizing the project ready infrastructure. And my most important part, it's not going to be a 200-page document. I want this to be an interactive website. So we actually went out for an Economic Development Administration CARES Act grant request last June. We received that dollars in April, which was $500,000 to do this broadband roadmap. We just signed project agreements to start working on the project, but I left a wiggle room of about $190,000 to really convert this into an interactive website. So an internet service provider across the state, across the country can type in 2 addresses and see all of the best case scenario based on this roadmap of where they should be looking and how we can help them. And the one other thing that I wanted to share was some of those key contacts of who really helped me kind of line in of finding out what we needed to do. And that's Valley Vision, it's RCRC. If you haven't talked to them, make sure you're understanding their strategic plans and their conversation about a broadband JPA. Really found a lot of useful information from CSAC, CENIC, California Emerging Tech Fund with CENIC and preferred scenarios. Make sure you're watching out. I know that we've talked about it a couple of times about the Department of Technology and their Broadband Council, their Middle Mile Advisory Committee. And I was going to share some links, and I have them in my PowerPoint of both the interactive map from the CPUC, but also the middle mile public comment. Make sure you're seeing those public comment spots. And then they released a map to show So essentially the proposed fiber lines on the middle mile and also the anchor institutions. And the two other things that I would say about feds is make sure you understand Economic Development Administration and all of their grants, but also the NTIA. They just put out a funding sheet, and you can ask Gladys or Valley Vision for that funding sheet. It was incredibly useful in all the different broadband grants. And one other piece that I found very helpful is making sure you talk to your legislative staff. The staff, they know about the appropriations, they can share ideas of where money is. And I included middle mile links and contact information. And what I would like to say is that what I have found really, really important is the education and having a plan. And that is what we're doing. We are creating a roadmap for 5 counties to make it attractive for internet service providers, but also outline where it is that the feds and the state funding can really make sense with what our priorities are, and really have a broadband roadmap that essentially is the template for all of our grant submissions. And it's going to be the nexus, it's going to be the reason, it's going to give us the outline. So I'm going to wrap it up there because I think I might pack a truck now. So thank you, Trish.
Oh my gosh, Cole, be careful, be safe. Text us when you get somewhere, and thank you again. We'll be in touch, and just all thinking, you know, why we need broadband for emergency services too. So
and
well.
Final thing is, Trish, please share my contact information. I wish I would stay on and answer questions, but I'm always open to any emails, any phone calls.
Yeah. Thank you, Cole. Take care. We'll be watching. Thank you. Oh my gosh. What a crazy time we're in. You know, the case has been made too. Many of the communities, the fire, every community, everybody's experiencing this, and why we need broadband to be able to connect, to know that everyone's safe and get emergency services. So Cole has a lot of great information. I know we'll just keep talking with Jeff about how we can continue to keep these dialogues going and share more resources. So it's my pleasure now to introduce Supervisor Gary Bradford from Yuba County. We have the pleasure to work with the supervisor now on planning in the county, and it's part of our consortium. And you've been a leader over the past several years, being always connected into the broader regional conversation as well as in the county. And also introduce Ian Scott, who is in the planning department, but also is the county's broadband coordinator now. So Supervisor Bradford, welcome, and love to have you just start with a little bit of background about the county and the issues and the challenges you're facing and why you got so engaged in the broadband issue.
Sure. Thank you, Trish, for having me this afternoon. And I unfortunately do not have a presentation, but I will change my background maybe a few times during the presentation so you can look at different parts of Yuba County while I'm talking. So hopefully Yuba County represents a lot of different geographic challenges and different types of geography that a lot of counties in the state might have. So I think we're a good sample when it comes to that kind of thing with respect to broadband. So first of all, just talking a little bit about the county. So as mentioned earlier, Yuba County is one of the 6 counties that make up the greater Sacramento region. We're at the northern end of that region. Plumas Lake, one of the communities in the southwest corner of the county, is about 30 miles north of the state capital, and our county seat, Marysville, is about 45 minutes north. So we're actually pretty close to the urban area of the Sacramento region. About half of our county is in the Sacramento Valley, and the other half is in the Sierra foothills. And as you can imagine, the foothill areas probably provide the biggest challenge for broadband access. We have a population of about 80,000, and the vast majority of those live in the Sacramento Valley portion of the county. And even more specifically, most of those people live within a few miles of the Feather River on the western edge of the county. The part of the county where most of the population lives is very suburban, and the remainder of the county is very rural, much of it in either ag land, rolling hills, or forested mountain areas, much like our friends to the east in Nevada County. So the suburban area of the county is served by at least 2 wireline internet providers, and generally has pretty good internet access, broadband access. Comcast and AT&T are those providers. And that area enjoys at least 100/20 service, with many of the areas served by Comcast actually able to get download speeds that exceed a gigabit. And a few areas of the suburban area actually have AT&T fiber to the home and can get 1,000/500 meg service. So unfortunately, that only equals about 3.2% of our households in the county, though. So it's not a ton. The more rural areas of the county are typically served by DSL and or fixed wireless, if they have service at all. Most of those rural areas that do lack service, they do lack service that's an acceptable speed for broadband in 2021. So even if they have service, it's really just not acceptable in many cases. It's certainly not 120, which I think most of us would agree is probably the minimal at this point in time to really be able to have multiple devices connected online and doing things like we're doing here with respect to Zoom and other things that are so important to our connected lives at this point. So within kind of the greater Yuba County, my district is at the southern and the southeastern portion of the county. It's about 150 square miles, so second largest district in the county. Most of the population in my district resides in the communities of Plumas Lake and Wheatland. Beale Air Force Base is also located in the district and has about 1,000 residents. There's a lot of agricultural land in my district. It's mostly in the Sacramento Valley with very little in the foothills. And so out of that ag district, though, only about 50% of that land, even in the Sacramento Valley, has service at the 25/3 level. And the other 50% is served at 6.1 or slower or has no service at all. So clearly that can be a challenge for the agricultural industry here in the county. And also my area of the county, kind of the southern area, is where the majority of the growth has occurred in the last couple decades, and it's where the majority of the growth is expected in the future. Not only residential, but also commercial and industrial. Along the Highway 65 corridor, we have about 900 acres zoned for sports and entertainment. Currently, it's home to a Hard Rock Hotel and Casino and the regional outdoor amphitheater for the Sacramento area, the Toyota Amphitheater. And then on the east side of Highway 65, really just across the freeway from those other two entities, there's about 3,000 acres that's zoned as an employment village to support commercial, light industrial, and industrial job centers. The city of Wheatland in the southern part of the county also is zoned for a lot of housing expansion, commercial and employment uses. But probably not surprisingly, most of those areas where that expansion is planned also lack broadband at speeds needed for future planned development. So we definitely have some key challenges here in the county. In addition to the things I've already mentioned, I think one of the biggest ones starting out was understanding where the gaps in coverage truly are. I think all of us can relate to the fact that the broadband coverage maps just aren't quite as accurate as we'd like them to be. We look at them and I think they tend to paint a little bit better picture, particularly in rural areas, of where people can get service and at what level they can get that service at. You know, we also, I think, struggled with where do we start? What kind of approach do we take? I think kind of thinking back to about the 2008 timeframe, I think that's when it was, Valley Vision came and did a broadband workshop for Yuba and Sutter counties. And I think that was really the first time that I learned, you know, about the situation in the county and that we really had a role to play as policymakers and as county government. It wasn't just left to the providers to solve this problem. And while I was at that workshop, someone suggested to me that I attend a conference coming up called the Broadband Communities Conference. And I was able to go to that. And I must say it was, I learned a ton about jurisdictions, both counties and cities all across the nation and the challenges they face, you know, from everything from mapping to, you know, how do they get broadband to rural areas? And I also learned there's a lot of different solutions, a ton of different solutions. And so one of the challenges is, you know, what's right for your community or for my community, right? You know, some communities decide they want to be a broadband provider. Some communities decide that they are going to build the infrastructure and then let one or more providers utilize and pay for that infrastructure, over time. And other communities, like was mentioned in Nevada County, really see their role as helping to encourage and fund expansion of the infrastructure through private entities that are broadband providers. And so, really wondering, well, what's right for Yuba County, right? And then, as we know, there's a lot of opportunities, even more now, but over the last couple of years, we hear about lots and lots of funding, but we don't want to waste that funding. We want to spend it strategically. And so, what's the best way to spend that money to get the ultimate goal accomplished of having affordable broadband for as many of our residents as possible? And another challenge I think we had, and I think all counties probably face, is how do you stay focused on this? I mean, this was mentioned by kind of some previous speakers as well. County employees have a lot of different jobs, and even if it is a priority of the Board of Supervisors to expand broadband access, there's a lot of other priorities, and there's a lot of day-to-day things that have to occur in the county. And county employees wear many hats, and it might be hard for them to keep broadband front and center in trying to get anything accomplished. So what did we do about some of these challenges? So I think the first thing we did is we decided we needed to hire a dedicated resource to focus on improving broadband access in Yuba County. And we actually made that decision a couple years ago. It took us a little while to accomplish it, as I mentioned, things come up and you can easily get sidetracked, and that happened. Recruitments don't always go as planned the first time around either. But at the end of the day, it worked out great for us. We did a second recruitment. I don't remember exactly when, but probably wrapped up in the last 6 months or so. And it was very successful. And we actually ended up with an internal hire from our planning department, Ian Scott, who's on with me today, and will be helping to answer questions later. And he's just a tremendous asset to our efforts in the county. So the other thing we did was we contracted with Valley Vision to put together a strategic broadband master plan for us. Some of the things in that plan, and this is not an exhaustive list, but it talks about the current state of broadband access in the county, right? What do things look like right now? It identifies middle mile and public resources that could be utilized for broadband coverage expansion. It provides recommendations on where to expand broadband infrastructure, and it provides policy recommendations that we can make and changes we can make to support broadband infrastructure development in our county. So we just recently received the draft of that plan, and our broadband project manager is reviewing it and is engaged in conversation with Valley Vision to provide some feedback and some input. We're also working with RCRC on their broadband JPA effort to help us even more. So what have been some of the outcomes of these efforts that we've done? So, the creation of the strategic broadband master plan helps us understand where we are and where we need to go, right? It was mentioned by other speakers as well. You need to have a plan. Without that plan, how do you know what to do? How do you know where to focus your funding? How do you know how the best way to spend that funding, right? It's not unlimited, and so we want to get the most bang for the buck. Another thing, I think, having a dedicated resource to drive all things broadband in Yuba County, I think that will be extremely valuable to have not only a single expert, but someone who that is their entire focus, right? When they come into the office in the morning, their job is to work on broadband. They don't have to worry about being pulled aside onto other tasks. And then just from looking at the plan, just in the last few weeks that we received, it's very evident that one of our challenges is lack of middle mile fiber, especially in our foothill areas. And that's very timely given, the state's plan to build a middle mile network. So I think our takeaways, just to reiterate some of the things I've already said, but really hit them home, is you need to know where you are, you need to know where you want to go, and you need to know how to get there. And you need someone to drive that effort. I think, in other words, based on our experience, I'd recommend that development of a plan and a dedicated resource or resources, if you're a larger county, to help drive that implementation is going to be critical to being successful. We also learned that in our case, we have a lack of middle mile fiber available to bring broadband infrastructure to the foothill areas. And hopefully the effort from the state to build a middle mile network will significantly reduce that challenge. Our broadband manager is currently working on policies related to things like dig once and communications tower permit streamlining, and we'll be bringing those before the Board of Supervisors. That's probably about it for this point. I know there's a lot of other things as we dig into the broadband plan and we really start looking at opportunities to utilize all the federal and state funding that's going to be coming available, but that's certainly the starting point. So I hope that was helpful, and thanks again for having me.
Thank you so much, Supervisor Bradford. And I think you can see from what you're saying, all the pieces, all the moving parts, and then, the coherence you've tried to bring to the process over the years. And I want to compliment you and Supervisor Fletcher for the leadership that you've both shown, because you're very engaged in the process too. This is not a distance thing, and the leadership, it shows that the leadership of the elected officials can really play a huge role in moving the process forward. So, and I just think, the consistency that you've all talked about building capacity and building through having staffing with Ian and somebody to coordinate, move it forward, just all great steps. And we're grateful for the opportunity to work with you and advance the mission.
Great,
So, yeah. So there's a question in the chat, which is a really good one. What is middle mile fiber? So, well, middle mile fiber is that backbone that runs across the state, and it carries the high-speed internet. And a lot of the middle mile in the state is actually owned by private providers. So it's not considered open access, it's proprietary. And so that's why the state is talking about investing in this middle mile network, and it's high speed, but then it's what you need to get to the last mile. So what Supervisor Bradford is talking about getting into the foothills is that you need in essence, is like a trunk line. And then you need to be able to build off of that to get to the harder to serve areas. So I'm sure there's a better technical description, and anybody should feel free to add that. But so here's another question. What large sources of funding are counties and communities looking at utilizing to effectuate their broadband projects? CARES, ARPA, and the $5 million of each county is known, but are there others we should be looking at? Well, I will invite the panel to comment, but I will just say under ARPA, there are many, many different sources of funding through many different agencies. There's NTIA that I think Gary mentioned, or Cole, there's EDA, there's USDA, there's the Treasury Department, there's the FCC. Some of these also relate to policies that actually allow previously subsidized internet to expand, like for schools and libraries. So there's some are direct subsidies to providers to get people signed up for low-cost internet services, so that we have a matrix that we'll provide to Jeff to get out to everybody on some of the upcoming funding sources. But it's a lot to track, and a lot of us have just primarily been focused what's happening on the state. So thanks to CETF, we're able to look at that range of federal programs. And I will say also, when the federal infrastructure bill passes, if it passes in September, there will again, it includes several different dimensions. So Jeff, did you want to add anything on that? Because you're tracking some of the state funding too.
Hey, thanks, Trish. I think that's right. The multiple sources through the federal government. The state funding is largely from SB 156 is either being spent by the state itself for the middle mile network, or going out essentially through the CPUC's CASF process, the infrastructure subsidy process, which now counties are eligible to directly apply for. And so that is an opportunity, but it's definitely an application process, not an automatic grant or an automatic pot of funding. the main pot of funding in the Rescue Plan Act is the flexible fiscal relief. And there are a few specific uses that are eligible for it, and one of them is very specifically necessary broadband infrastructure. And I guess the last one I'd say is, as Steve said, they were doing in Nevada County. Of course, there's county general fund dollars, though those are scarce, and there are always too many things to use it on.
Yeah, I think given that each county will be getting the $5 million, that's a real question for the counties, is how are you going to spend that money? And like Supervisor Bradford was mentioning, knowing what you need to do, what are your priorities, what are your target investment areas? It's really working from that, I think, and seeing what the match opportunities are, rather than saying, here's money, let's go after it. Like, what aligns with what your goals are?
Yeah, and I would use that 5 million as a multiplier, right? That's what we want to do, is multiply that. So you should be able to leverage that fourfold, I would hope, to bring that additional investment into your community.
Yeah, some of the federal funding does require match too. So that's another opportunity.
And I think that those grants, the 5 million that you all are talking about, I believe it's from SB 156. It's for projects in the county, and so to the extent that it's not 100% clear to me that it's funding that will be going to the county government, it's for projects that are within the county. And so I think working with the private providers and working with the PUC just to try and direct that as much as you can. If everybody's on the same page, then hopefully that's the way it'll go. So it's just another reason to work with those other stakeholders.
And I think, again, there are some new resources coming. The PUC is going to help us with some mapping around some of those middle mile assets, and where are those leverage points to get to the last mile. That's really the point, because they said that they are going to start trying to reach those census designated places that are the most underserved or unserved. But as here's another thing: as the speed levels increase from what they were, more households are going to be considered to be unserved, right? And then we have the economic development needs to connect. We have the resilience needs, the emergency services. And, Steve, you really described well the physical challenges that you deal with to try to connect everybody. And we're all watching the fires now. So how can we be ready? And there's other things about undergrounding infrastructure too, which would create more cost. So, but maybe more resiliency and safety. So
I think
let's see, there's one more question. Is the minimum amount of funding for last mile projects contained? Oh, it's a minimum amount of funding of last mile projects in each county.
It was a question about the $5 million that we were talking about, which, just to clarify for everyone, it's in SB 156. SB 156 had the $3.25 billion for the state-owned middle mile network, and then $2 billion for last mile projects that will essentially be, the way I understand it, go out through the CSAC program, the PUC's infrastructure subsidy program, and those are divvied up in such a way that there is at least $5 million for last mile projects in each and every county. There's also a split of that money between urban counties and rural counties. So it's a minimum amount. I think most counties will see significantly more than that. It is supposed to go out roughly proportionate by geographic area to the places with more, or in proportion to the number of unserved and underserved households. Just to, I think the legislature wanted to put some of those guardrails in to make sure that all the funding didn't go to one or two well-connected or even easy to connect counties or areas. Well, that takes us, I think, to the end of our time. I want to respect everybody's time commitments. Really want to thank all of our speakers. both our county officials and our friends at Valley Vision and CETF. Thank you so much for sharing the stories about what you're doing in your counties. Thank you, Trish and Gladys, for going over the resource guide for local officials. Hopefully everybody got that link out of the chat. If not, go to CETF's website and you can find it. I believe it's right there on the front page right now of CETF's website. So go and download that. Lots of great practical things counties can do to take advantage of the historic opportunities everyone has this year. So thank you also to all the attendees. Thank you for spending your time with us this afternoon. We've recorded this webinar and we'll go through and clean it up and edit it and to take out all of my uhs and ums. And then we should be able to post it within about a week on our website, and we'll share it with all of our presenters. So again, thank you, everyone, and we will talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you
you.
again for the opportunity. Take care, everybody. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.